my God, full house. It's a big audience. Woo! You! All right, thank you for having us, guys. Thanks for turning up. We're going to have a great conversation about balancing... Oh, thanks, Benny. Balancing fun and profit in Web3 games, probably my favorite topic to riff on. And we have an amazing panel here. I will introduce you guys very quickly, just so that we don't spend too much time on intros, because we've only got 20 minutes. World-renowned economist who has worked on designing the game economies of some of the best-known, best-loved Web3 games out there. We have a founder of a Web3 gaming company and one of my favorite Web3 games in the world, Crypto Unicorns. But also with a long history working in Web2 gaming. So a lot of legacy learnings we have to bring over to the industry there. And that's Aron Beierschmitt, Lisa J.Y. Tan. And we've got Benny Giang. He is the co-author of ERC 6551, which is one of the most exciting new trends in NFTs coming up. And he was there for the dawn of things like CryptoKitties, Dapper Labs. So again, we've got a lot of clout here. So just to get us started, I think there's a lot of learnings that we need to unpack in terms of what's happened over the past couple of years. Aron, maybe you want to kick us off. You've been there right on the front line, building what I think is a brilliant game, but it hasn't been, a smooth path to success. So what are some of the biggest things that you've learned in terms of building a game that can balance fun and profit over the last, 2 years, 3 years? Yeah.
We need a much longer panel. TLDR, I focused a little too much early on in trying to embed as much economic depth within our system as possible. That was both a good thing in that, for the first 9 months of shipping the game, there were more tokens going in than coming out, which very few to almost none of our competitors can really make that claim. The challenge on top of that is I didn't think about completing the economic loop. And we launched without a fully complete economic loop. And what I mean by that is, for example, the economic depth of the system incentivized players to breed a lot of unicorns because they needed a lot of unicorns. It did not incentivize players to optimally breed high stat, good gene unicorns, right? And ultimately that inflated the supply. We now have hundreds of thousands of unicorns. With relatively low demand, you can imagine what happened to price on most of those unicorns. Obviously, a super high tier legendary unicorn just went for tens of thousands of dollars, right? So there's a big range there. But again, we launched without a complete economic loop. We've just completed it with the Glue Factory, which lets you take your donkeys, your low stat unicorns, burn them for unicorn souls, and use those unicorn souls to equip gems for your high stat, high tier, high rarity unicorns. And that embedded a deflationary mechanism into the system that is tied to the actual vertical progression of your remaining unicorns. And in 2 weeks, we've already seen 1% of the supply burned. And I look at that and go, we should have launched with that. And so in the rush to kind of hit the tail end of the last bull and get a game live and out, we didn't take the time to, again, complete economic loops. And that would be my advice to any developer launching a game today, is making sure you really have the full system, because once you let an economy out of the bag, it's impossible to put it back.
So I'm just going to tap on...
I hoped you would.
Yeah, so I'm going to tap on Aron's point. When we talk about the game system, and people usually think about the supply side, right? How do I introduce new supply into the system, and how do I build that? How do I use tokens to look at user acquisition? Nobody thinks about user retention, but that is how games work. You need to have high level of user retention. And we talk about the minimum, almost like the minimum viable system or minimum viable economics in place. It's about not getting the full model in place that you guys have done now, but you need to get at least a minimum viable system in place on sinks and faucets for things to run. Minimum viable doesn't just mean what is the user or what's the token introduction into the system, but how do you take tokens out? How do you balance between value created, intrinsic value created in the game, and the assets that will represent the intrinsic value so that we can find market value, which are tokens. That balance is something that projects don't see. Projects are just thinking very short term. I'm looking at user acquisition, and because that's what my investors are looking for, and I just want to pump it. But how do you sustain it? The pump just doesn't stay like that. You need to find ways to close the loop, and that is what minimum viable economics will look like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that is the whole, that's my point, right? Like, you've got to find a way to do that. Otherwise, you're going to let an economic system out of the bag, and it will go in one direction, which is towards collapse.
I mean, we saw that with CryptoKitties as well, right?
I mean, yeah, there's like 2 million CryptoKitties, and like, I think when we first began, we never really thought about how deeply the economic systems can get, right? Of course, with CryptoKitties, we never introduced an ERC20, like kitty coins or anything like that, but that would have created another dimension of like a double-edged sword of good and bad as well, so I 100% agree.
So I'm just going to add one more point, because there's just a lot of points to add, and 20 minutes is definitely not enough. But when we think about token utility, the tokens need to exist for a reason as well. And the main goal of an economy is sustainability, but sustainability from a fun perspective. If the game is not fun, if everything you're designing is financialization in mind, the game will not scale. As you mentioned, people will have a lot of supply, there isn't a demand because there is no intrinsic value to hold these assets. So you're just building for the sake of building, and it just does not work. That is not sustainable, that doesn't work, and I have no idea how people keep funding such activities. It's almost like a hobby, not a business, and you don't fund hobbies, you fund businesses that actually is sustainable. It's a sustainable, growing economy that generates revenue and fun for the players and for the studios.
I mean, yeah, I'll echo that. It's the only way to keep value in the system over time, right? If it is purely a financial game, people will optimize towards that, and they will leave as the rewards falter, right? We're going on 2 years of 24/7 live operations of our game, and we have users who've played every single day that we've been live, right? So the only way you really retain people over time is obviously to build an experience that captures them. Now, one thing that I like to debate is obviously there's a lot of different flavors of fun. Some people don't like our land gameplay, but really like Rainbow Rumble or really like Unicorn Party, some of our ecosystem games, right? And so there's a wide spectrum of what people consider to be fun, and ultimately you have to fall somewhere on that spectrum to ultimately have a sustainable ecosystem and product.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Like, we said we weren't going to do this. We were going to debate. I wasn't meant to say, like, I agree. No, but it is true. Like, I think a big problem we've seen over the past couple of years with Web3 games is that they were overly financialized. A lot of the people coming into those games were only looking for finance or profit. My personal opinion is, and I actually wrote a CoinDesk opinion column about this recently, but I do think we could have a cohort of players that are incentivized by that, but problems come in when everybody expects to earn from the game. But I just wanted to like zoom out a little bit, right? Because we were kind of talking about specific games. Lisa, are you seeing that a lot, like in terms of learnings from the last cycle? Like, what do you think will be the trends going forward in terms of game design and sustainable token economics? What do you think we're going to see that's going to be quite markedly different to the last cycle?
Yeah, very good question. There are a lot of trends that were working and were not working, and there are a few that I want to pick out. The first one will be understanding what utility or what is the origin of value that is embedded within these assets. So we talk about different kinds of fun, and these fun is usually a reflection of who is in your game, who is in your system. If you're marketing it as a hyper casual, but you get to earn money kind of thing, then you're attracting the kind of people that are looking to extract value, and whatever that is fun to them. It's extracting value, and you can embed all forms of cool long-term value creation in your token, but nobody will care about that. So something that it's quite talked about in like more serious game studios. I don't know if it's for every game, but things like the LVT, it's a kind of taxation model for NFTs or for assets. So in the physical world, we call it land value tax. Have you guys heard of that? So it's taxing land and increasing the utility of these assets in the space. So we have all these, metaverse kind of decentral land, and these are the great metaverse ecosystems that's selling land, but the people are just buying land for the sake of holding land, hoping that it will exceed in prices. What we need to do is we need to create incentives to nudge people to be creating value. That's the main important thing. How do you create value, and how do you embed these value creation within tokens? The second thing is, and then it's like NFTs or non-fungible tokens, doesn't matter. You just need to embed that. The second thing is probably more on the lesson simulations, more on data analytics side of things. You talk about live ops as well. And there was a huge chunk of people just focusing on running simulations. How do you build games? How do you turn them into simulations? How do you get that data to figure out what to edit and change? The thing is, games are basically like economies, like countries. There's so many diverse economic agents things that they could do, and that's where AI could come in to expose what the variety of economic agents are. So how do we even simulate these things? There's so many points that we just don't understand, and simulations just probably it's not going to scale. It's not going to be that. I'm not that bullish on simulations on game validation. However, data analytics is going to be very, very important. How do you measure your user retention? I would like investors to start talking a lot more about what's your 7 days, 14 days, 90 days retention. How do they how is that related to ARPU? How is that related to the DAU? How does that relate to value creation in the space? There is not enough analytics on that. And one of the problems is that 90% of data is off-chain. And so there are not a lot of, there's probably like 1 or 2 game studio or analytics firms that's trying to aggregate all the data together, and there are quite a few people trying to figure that out, but we're not there yet, and I hope this will change. And the third one will be investors, which is a very key big player in this entire ecosystem we're talking about. Because we can talk about building the best model, we can talk about going in-depth into the economic stack, we can build everything out, but investors have an incentive to say, I need my returns. I'm going to give you money, I'm going to give you funding, but if you don't give me some returns, why am I funding you? I'm not funding your hobby, I'm not funding I'm not funding it as a subsidy to get users. I need to get returns. And that's where we go back to the whole point of we need to talk about financialization in this game. And that's, to me, that's a big struggle. And I would like to know how you guys deal with that, because you've got one part of the economic agent, which are investors. I'm putting money in because I'm expecting money out. You need to give me that model. And the other parts will be players that's interested in playing the game, and fun is what they want to maximize, not exactly the financialization part. These are opposing factors, and we need to embed both in the token and in the model. I find it quite a bit of a challenge.
I have a question. Do all players have to be humans? Is fun only because we as humans want to have fun while playing games? But if we're imagining games in the future where there are agents or NPCs or whatever, and they're playing the games and we're kind of managing them, like, is that a job or is that fun? And do we need to optimize for fun? And how do we kind of assess metrics at that point where D7, D14 is based on a human coming back and clicking a button, but a bot or NPC will click the button no matter what because it's programmed too. I wonder what we think about this topic.
So just before you dive into that, I feel like that was a very loaded question, Benny. Do you want to just give us a quick elevator pitch on ERC 6551 and particularly what it could potentially do in terms of when it's coupled with AIs bringing NPCs to life?
Yeah, so I was part of the team that worked on the ERC 721 standard, the NFT standard. And then 7 years into the future, which is last year, at ETHDenver, we released the new standard called ERC 6551, token-bound accounts. The TLDR is we linked every single NFT with their own wallet or smart account. And so now an NFT has 3 new properties. One is asset ownership, second is social identity, and the third is programmability, which brings us back to games of like what happens if you program an NFT to play a game that's on chain on your behalf, earning these tokens and driving up the metrics. Is it still a game? Is it optimized for fun, or is it not?
I mean, that just comes back to my point. There's many flavors of fun, right? Inside of our game, particularly core land gameplay, a lot of the fun is in the Forex strategy side of that. It's how you're optimizing your setup for players running teams of scholars. It's actually managing those players. And you could say, well, that's kind of a weird game. It's almost a job. And anyone who's played EVE Online better understands, like, people can obsess over these kind of games and these systems because they're deep. And there's opportunities for specialization. There's opportunities to corner the market on certain items. Like, again, there's a spectrum of players who are going to find that very enjoyable. And, again, our retention speaks to it. Our day 365 is 24%, right? I mean, that's an insane number that most Web 2 games cannot compete with. You can't say in the bear market that all of our players were making so much money that they just sat there for 365 days pulling cash out of the machine. Especially with what I said earlier, where we were net tokens into the game over the first year. So again, there's a whole spectrum of fun, whether it's AI bots, whether it's scholars, et cetera. There's an aspect of fun to being the authority, being the manager, and not necessarily being a grunt or a grinder.
So I'm going to go the other direction. And let's debate for a little bit. So,
Fight.
so I think there's a lot of opportunities in that. At the same time, I'm just going down the dystopian way, right? There's a theory called the date internet theory, where 99% of everything online are bots. So we're just using bots' behavior to train more bots, and it's just all bots. Humans just become the manager. But what's the fun in that? A lot of the people that I know and work with, nobody likes managing. People like doing the work. And people like doing the grunt work because there's a level of satisfaction to see your input result in an output. Management of people, management of bots is very passive. How do I know I'm doing well? I don't know. I think the happiest...
It's a factor of how well your bots are doing, right? If it's fully on chain, you cannot avoid this problem unless you have a solution to it, right? Because anyone can interface with our contracts and build a bot around it, right? And so at the end of the day, you foundationally have to accept the idea that AI agents are going to be in your system, I guess is my counterpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there will be some level of AI agents in the space, but when most of the players, those creating value are AI agents, then this changes the social economic structure of this game that we're talking about. People become capital owners, and only the rich can become capital owners that outsources the work to these bots, and we're just adversely selecting for a greater inequality divide between the agents in this space. And that is a very strange society that we're living in. That who is having fun? It's fun sitting on the owning capital, having AI bots working for you, and you just have a big fat paycheck at the end of the day. That's like heroin on steroids for games.
Oh, this is great. So I'm on the flip side of you because there's one element that we cannot change, which is time. We all live X amount of years. We all have 8 hours of work a day, and you go home, you cook some dinner, and then you go watch Netflix, and you go to bed, right? So that element we cannot change. So what this does is it kind of questions, what is important to the human, right? Is it 8 hours a day working your normal job, or how many hours do you spend in a day playing a game or mobile game, maybe a few hours? Does that time kind of abstract into this AI agent, this NPC that does it for you, and now your element of fun is actually going outside and enjoying the sunshine while the agents
outside? What's that?
Yeah, the fictitious
grass?
sunlight. But so that's what I would say about time is the element.
I agree. So I call that time arbitrage, and we see that in a lot of games, right? You see that a lot of game farmers are in a lower socioeconomic kind of society or countries because it's cheaper, or you make more money spending 1 hour playing the game than 1 hour in minimum wage. So we see that time arbitrage already with real humans in the system, and they're just working because they're grinding, they're making money. But are they creating value? That's the key thing. And now we're just changing these humans in developing nations to AI bots, and are they just creating for the sake of creating to return it to the capital owners, which are people who own these bots? And what does that mean for us? Like, what does it mean for games? Are we just building managers, like a game for managers, and then we're going to train them to become managers of a company? Like, what's the end goal? What is fun? Is that fun?
So you're just talking to someone who played Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri and Sim City and all this shit, right? So I've played games that, where there's minions that do your bidding, right? And again, whether they're AI agents, whether you're running teams of scholars overseas, et cetera, there is fun in that. There can be a lot of fun in that. And then from the perspective of sustaining the economy over time, you have to ensure that how does it capture value inside of it?
Yes.
And to your point, it is that whole spectrum of I am a more whale-oriented player. I want to deploy these bots. I want to deploy these scholars. I'm putting money into the system. I'm obviously looking over time to get some out. I'm taking a bet that this economy scales, beyond when I entered it. And then the hope is on the other side, you have players coming in that go, you know what, there's some fun here. I mean, shout out to Pixels. I think Pixels is showing this has a very interesting model. We'll see if it sustains. I have questions
Pixels
around
on the
it,
Ronin network, really killing it right now.
They are, and it is a very interesting thing. So you have the 5,000 land NFT holders, and then you have the grinders who come in and work on that land, right? Many of them, I would like to think, are probably bots.
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, the CEO of Pixels, Luke, has actually come out and admitted that he thinks probably only about 40% of their 180,000 DAU are actually real people. And the majority of them are coming from the Philippines. So,
Yep.
yeah.
For sure.
Guys, we've only got 11 seconds left. I just want to say quickly, my favorite takeaway from this panel was many flavors of fun. I think we all have different perspectives in terms of how to build these sustainable game economies that balance fun and profit. But the most exciting thing about Web3 is this is the first time in history that we've been able to actually successfully and legitimately integrate secondary markets and interoperability into these economies. So I think that's when we'll really be able to explore what all those flavors of fun may be. So I just want to say thanks, guys. That was a spicy panel. I just wish we had more time.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, everybody.